My name is Lilli Engle. I'm the founder and director of the American University Center of Provence in Aix-en-Provence, France, and Marseille, France. And I was invited to be the plenary speaker for the 9th annual conference of the Foreign Education Abroad with the theme, Moving Beyond It Was Great, to really start to look more in depth at the quality of the student experience abroad. And my plenary was entitled, Where Are We Now and Where Do We Go From Here? And in the time that was accorded to me, it was a wonderful opportunity to just take a quick look at how far we have come as a field. And in many ways, it's quite brilliant in the fact that we have increased substantially the numbers of students we send abroad to hit almost 280,000 for the 2010-2011 academic year. We know, so we founded the forum and the data committees and the outcomes assessment committees. We've incorporated into our dialogue so much more evident concern about outcomes, to the extent that in the past 10 years there have been almost 1,000 different research projects devoted to study abroad. So much more information is available to us today. And yet, it feels almost as though we have sort of hit a glass ceiling in what we're able to do as a profession, which is forcing us to look at why we have come across maybe an obstacle that may well be insurmountable unless we change the strategies that we've put in place. I can give you a quick example. In 2003, a book called Rocking in Red Square was published by Nana Reithart and Walter Grunswig. And that book has just been reprinted and redistributed because the publishers thought that all of the issues raised in that edition were still relevant today. Now that was 10 years ago. And so that means that words like intentionality and outcomes and intercultural competence have been with us for a long time. And yet, the only thing that we can look towards with hope are little, let's call them pods, little particular programs or particular individuals that are genuinely making headway in cultivating in their students some measurable and discernible learning outcomes abroad in the field of intercultural learning. Now, when we talk about intercultural learning, there are many, many misconceptions that are linked to that. And people think, well, we really send students abroad for the academics. Well, in fact, if we really listen to the concerns of study abroad advisors and professors, there's always a kind of fear that the quality of the classroom experience abroad is not going to be to American standards. And yet, we decide to send students abroad, ostensibly for something more. So the issue of then language, foreign language acquisition comes up. And yet, when we look closely at that, in fact, in a forum survey of the profession in just last year, it turned out that the rising numbers of English language speaking programs in non-English speaking countries is really at the bottom of our list of concerns. And only 22% of us are actually testing in foreign language learning outcomes abroad. So it remains that if we are engaged in this massive mobilization of energy, human resource, finance, to send students abroad in these increasing numbers, there has to be a provocative reason why. And we can only look towards intercultural learning as the answer. And we talk about it in great terms like transformational learning, life-changing experience, and such. And all of our publicity for those experiences become credit-bearing adventures that will attract larger and larger numbers of students to engage in that kind of adventure. And yet, when they get there, something happens that is sort of in contradiction with what we'd hoped for or expected. And that is they continue to cluster in American student groups and continue to speak English and continue to, as we've been saying, and this again credited to Milton Bennett, who has been saying it for the past 20 years, and that is an indictment in itself, that is to the students recreate a home university experience in the vicinity of their foreign study destination, so in the vicinity of Shanghai, of Beijing, or of Barcelona. So as educators, what do we do? And that's what I hope to look at my plenary. And what I put forward were 4 aligning principles. The first one being intentionality. What I discovered in dealing with study abroad administrators and faculty nationwide is that when asked why they do what they do, the answers always remain so broad just to basically say what we're doing is a good thing. But it's a good thing to put them in a homestay. It's a good thing to give them direct enrollment. But to really determine what kind of learning they were hoping would come out of it has never really been articulated in a way to give us a clear direction in our pedagogy. So intentionality would mean lucid mission statements and very specifically targeted outcomes that would be identified on a program-to-program basis. The second point was differentiation. Unfortunately, I think for everyone concerned, and maybe even number one for our students, we talk about study abroad in very general terms, and that means that study abroad means, the competition for how many major capitals in the world I've seen in my 6-week program abroad, to how many photos I can paste on my Facebook page, to these mementos of study abroad, and even a less likelihood of being able to express in any fine detail the kind of learning the student has experienced. So if a potential employer sees on a student's resume that they've done study abroad, well, it's going to depend an awful lot on that employer's experience of study abroad or not, and they will equate their experience to that student reference. And that will be their only reference to determine the quality of that experience, aside from the duration of the stay. So a differentiation within this vast thing called study abroad. So again, differentiating then amongst all of the different program types and what those program types then hope to achieve. And depending on what they achieve, depending so much on the level of intervention. So intervention can be misinterpreted as hand-holding or being too protective, but in fact it's the playing out of the very reliable model of challenge and support. So putting students in a situation that they are going to perceive as different, that destabilizing difference that is so essential to learning, that catalyst that we can play upon to really provoke transformational learning has to be found in that difference. But if there's not some sort of intervention to accompany that encounter with difference, what we find is that students just sort of crash and burn or recoil or take refuge, as I call it, behind their computer screens and latch on to their peer groups or their friends and families at home, even while being abroad. And the last, and that keeps everyone honest and everyone on track, is assessment, which should be systematic and reliable. And if they're homemade instruments, then they can be qualitative and give us nice feedback in terms of reinforcing the goals we hope to achieve. But there can be some independent testing with all of the numerous reliable independent instruments that are out there. And that mixed method is really one of the things that we can use to track how efficient we actually are in our endeavors. So it's a wonderfully stimulating field. But again, we know we can talk openly about the millennium generation, millennials, and what they're all about. And so we know our student audience. But if we don't see clearly where we want to take them in very clearly definable terms, then it's who those students are and the values that they already carry within them and the values that are already deeply anchored in our field, which are unfortunately very dominated by consumer values. Those are the things that are going to dominate what we do abroad and continue to reinforce the mediocre outcomes that we've been confronted with. So I ended my plenary by presenting just sort of a peek at a developmental model for student learning abroad, which I hope to present to the field in the coming months. And it broke down study abroad into 6 discernible levels based on the the intensity, let's call it, of the encounter with difference, and then the different intervention support mechanisms that can be put in place to transform that encounter with difference into some very targeted learning. And I showed it briefly and sort of let people see all of the different kinds of intercultural learning we can hope to achieve in very realistic ways that are from, the first international flight for some to maybe the ultimate goal of perspective shifting for others. And in the middle of that very vast spectrum, there are numerous dozens, maybe even hundreds, I obviously couldn't name them all, of different very real and valuable targeted learning goals that we can then aim for in our very promising field. So lots of daunting challenges, but many, many talented people that maybe are being sabotaged by institutional policies that are not listening to what our student outcomes are crying so very loud for us to recognize. And that is, whatever we're doing now, we need to be doing much more in a much more concerted, much more coherent way.